Hello and welcome back, everyone. Brace yourselves because we're going to dive into a superhero world that's not about your quintessential heroes. In today's video, we're digging up 25 insane facts about the famous adult superhero franchise, The Boys. Written by Garth Ennis and Darick Robertson in the early 2000s, the comics portrayed something never before seen in any superhero universe. Be it the true origin of MMs Nickname or Black Noir's role in the comics, the original story had plot points that will shatter everything you know about the Boys universe. Not just the comics, Eric Kripke's TV adaptation also has several intriguing spin-offs and in-show anecdotes that will leave any fan awestruck. So grab your popcorn and hop onto this wild ride because we're ready to get started with 25 insane facts about the Boys universe. Did you know that the Boys comic was so controversial that its original publisher, Wildstorm, an imprint of DC, dropped it after just 6 issues? If I told you that the Boys was originally supposed to be an obscure piece of comic history, you probably wouldn't believe me, but that's exactly what might have happened. Its original publisher, Wildstorm, which was basically an imprint of DC, decided to cancel the comic series on the 14th of January 2007 after publishing only 6 issues right when it was beginning to take off. The cynical, overly violent, anti-superhero tone of The Boys wasn't sitting well with DC, and any comic nerd would agree that The Boys should never have existed in the same lane as DC Comics. The decision wasn't in support of the creators, to say the least, and co-creator Darick Robertson snarkily retorted that DC was actually doing them a favor by canceling their rights so that they could find a new publisher. However, despite his exclusive contract with DC, Robertson was allowed to continue working on The Boys. Luckily, Garth Ennis soon issued a statement claiming that many publishers have shown interest in reviving the comic series. Honestly, not surprising. Anyone could see the massive potential it had. After this fiasco, Ennis assured fans that issue 7 and a reprinted version of the first 6 issues would be available, and in February 2007, The Boys was picked up by Dynamite Entertainment, under which it ran for 66 issues, apart from the limited editions. Dynamite then published a collection of the first 6 issues, famously known as The Name of the Game, with a foreword written by none other than Simon Pegg. In an interview with CBR, Ennis revealed that DC's decision to drop The Boys actually worked as a blessing in disguise for the series. He hailed Dynamite for giving the creators the freedom they needed to make the story come to light, which wouldn't have happened under DC's banner. The story, Ennis believes, would have been heavily trimmed and edited, and writing it would have been a frustrating task if DC had continued with them. Dynamite actually lifted the series to great heights by announcing spin-offs like Herogasm in 2009 and other subsequent miniseries like Highland Laddie and Butcher Baker Candlestick Maker. Later on, these 3 were compiled into separate volumes of The Boys. And that's not it either. From June to November 2020, the publication company launched an epilogue series of 8 issues titled Dear Becky. Frankly, The Boys would not have been the diabolical masterpiece it is today if DC hadn't pulled the plug on it. Ironically, one of DC's biggest mistakes became an incredible boon for its creators. Were you aware that Huie Campbell's look in the comics was based on actor Simon Pegg, who later played his father in the TV show? Have you ever wondered why Huie looks a lot like Simon Pegg? Well, here's the story. An ardent fan himself, Simon Pegg didn't even know how big an influence he was to the Boys comics. Pegg was a relatively unknown name in the early 2000s, having just appeared in a British sitcom, Spaced, where he played the role of a comic store worker and a struggling artist. This is when Robertson and Ennis noticed him and thought of modeling Huie's character on him. Huie, in all his determination and innocence, was ideally Robertson's brainchild. Ennis finally conceptualized the character based on Pegg and an old friend of his, and coincidentally, both Boys and Pegg began rising to stardom around the same time, the latter with the release of Shaun of the Dead. Pegg wasn't even consulted or asked for permission before using him as an inspiration, but the actor holds no complaints about it. He jokingly called it a reverse audition where he was a part of the series without his knowledge. In the introduction to The Boys Volume 1, Pegg himself wrote that had he not been a fan, he might have been annoyed at this involuntary involvement. Pegg also understood the reason behind choosing him. Neither he nor the creators had any idea that he would become a household name after a zombie apocalypse. Interestingly, Pegg played the role of Huey's dad in the 2019 TV adaptation of the comic. A lot of things could have gone wrong with this decision, but an accidental fanboy moment saved the franchise. Have you noticed the 7 are direct parodies of the Justice League, with each member mirroring a famous DC superhero? While The Boys now thrives on satirizing the DC universe, things were meant to be completely different. Had Wildstorm not scrapped it, it was originally going to have a crossover with the Justice League and include iconic DC characters like Superman and Batman. Yup, every time you drew those parallels between Homelander and Superman or Queen Maeve and Wonder Woman, you had an extremely valid point. Even Jack from Jupiter was a direct parody of Martian Manhunter from DC Comics, rounding out the 7. This character was in turn replaced by Translucent, who was exclusively designed for the TV show and was played by Alex Hassel. Probably the budget wasn't high enough to bring an alien in the first season, and sticking to invisibility and superhuman durability seemed like a better choice. That said, Ennis stated that he always knew that such a crossover would have been disastrous and was actually relieved when Wildstorm was discontinued by DC because The Boys was initially pitched to function within the DC universe where these bad soups fought the actual Justice League. We mean the real one with Batman and Superman, not some less than subtle parody. Robertson recalled his first pitch to the studio where The Boys was designed as a group of private detectives living within the DC canon to investigate the mess left behind by these seemingly picture-perfect superheroes. Think about it. Superman comics are equivalent to the stunts Vought pulls off to cleanse the 7 of their otherwise sinful activities. Doesn't quite fit the shoes, right? Having written similar stories like Hitman and Punisher Kills, Ennis strongly stood by his idea. However, by the time the first issue hit comic book racks, the characters had been parodied. It was actually Robertson who convinced Ennis to revise it since the original idea was too unworkable. Do you think The Boys was actually a slap on the DC universe, or unwittingly carried some bits of DC through its every step? Did you know the comics are even more graphic and explicit than the already shocking TV adaptation? Do not watch The Boys if you are under 18. Why does this disclaimer pop up again and again? Well, it's purely because of the comic's debaucherous themes and extremely gory portrayals that The Boys earned its infamous reputation. The comic had no regard for public approval. It chose to make the superheroes extremely evil without any redeeming qualities and depicted questionably violent and graphic scenes when The Boys had to deal with them. The comics had scenes as harsh and blatant as a 12-year-old girl shooting pornography with her drug-addict mother. However, the TV adaptation went somewhat soft on the explicitly gruesome elements. The show continued the original storyline of gory satire of the superhero genre, but developed a more layered plot centered around the idea that absolute power creates absolute corruptors. Somehow, the comics miss out on this little nuance which added clarity and motive to the superheroes' sinful actions, or maybe they just didn't care to incorporate any redeeming traits. The show, however, wholeheartedly true to the author's vision, makes clever creative choices in showing mature and grisly content. For instance, in the comics, Starlight is sexually assaulted by the deadly trio Homelander, A-Train, and Black Noir, while in the show, this horrific narrative was watered down to only the Deep molesting her. Were you surprised to learn that, in the comics, Black Noir is actually a clone of Homelander? Remember how Black Noir was killed by Homelander in The Boys Season 3 after he found out that Noir always knew the truth about his father, Soldier Boy? And then, in the next season, Noir's duplicate was reduced to a somewhat comical figure. He was now a narcoleptic, talkative soup who couldn't wrap his head around the violent tasks. Actually, this was the result of complete creative freedom for the makers. The original comics portray Homelander and Noir in a totally different, albeit surprising, dynamic. In issue 65 of the comic, a major twist unfolded. Black Noir was revealed to be Homelander's direct clone, who was created by Vought as a failsafe if Homelander ever went out of his limits and lost his mind. Throughout the entire comic series, Noir is shown as a stoic and mute personality who somehow continues to keep a check on Homelander. However, he never gave enough reasons for Noir to take him down. Frustrated by the endless wait, Black Noir slowly became psychotic and ultimately falsely framed Homelander for heinous crimes, including rape and cannibalism, marking his descent into villainy. A shocked Homelander had no memory of committing such crimes, and that drove him crazy enough to attack the United States government. In a final showdown at the White House, Noir revealed his mission to Butcher and ended up killing Homelander. However, Noir too sustained heavy injuries during the fight, and with the intervention of the US military, he was further weakened, allowing Butcher to kill him. Yup, as surprising as it sounds, this was the original storyline, which came as a huge Easter egg for the fans. Though the show has strayed away from this honestly insane plot twist in the comics, the new Black Noir in Season 4, no matter how insubstantial, has given fans hope about this unexplored possibility. Do you really think this actor / Black Noir would ever be revealed as something more? Something big enough to take down Homelander? Food for thought, huh? Did you know that Compound V can turn dead superheroes into zombies in the comics? I believe the functionality and powers of Compound V have been kind of diluted in the live-action series, at least until now. We all know the inglorious and complex history behind this mysterious drug developed by Frederick Vought, a German physicist. Originally created to make superhuman soldiers for the Nazi government, this chemical was finally entrusted in the hands of the US military. It then found a home at Vought International, which used Compound V to genetically mutate ordinary beings into soups. Granting inexplicable powers, superhuman strength, and durability is pretty much what the show reveals about Compound V. But there's a much darker quality of the serum that the TV series hasn't touched upon yet: resurrection, or more aptly, zombie resurrection. Yeah, you heard that right. Compound V has the ability to bring back dead superheroes, but in the form of brain-dead reanimated corpses. In issue 19 of The Boys, one such zombie resurrection involves reviving a dead lamplighter. While Lamplighter is now dead in the show and is just restricted to Mallory's miserable memories, his arc in the comic was way more disturbing. When Starlight and A-Train were tasked with cleaning a hidden facility in the Seven headquarters, they came across something that shook them: a scary zombie version of Lamplighter existing as vivid proof of Vaught's colossal failure. The comic follows Mallory killing Lamplighter to avenge her grandchildren's murder, who was then revived by Vought using Compound V to avoid a public scandal. However, the Lamplighter that came back was no normal being, but an undead form of himself, forced to live in filth and confusion. The mysterious blue serum in his blood did technically bring him back from death, but at what cost? The only winner here was Vought, who could maintain their infallible image before the world without batting an eyelid for the superhero's well-being. While the show hasn't yet treaded into this strange territory, who knows if there's any chance that Huey's dad might just be the first zombie to appear on screen. Fan theories have more than often speculated this, and frankly, it's justified due to his tragic death and Mrs. Campbell's desperate attempt to save him using the V. Have you heard about the Herogasm spinoff, which details the superhero's wild annual retreat? The Boys is known for delving into mature themes, including explicit sexual content, but nothing could prepare fans for Herogasm, which was a 6-issue spin-off series released in 2009. It depicts an annual orgy retreat for all the soups as a part of the vacation organized by Vought for them to unwind for a week. If you're not yet shocked, Vought hires sex workers for hundreds and thousands of dollars to be available for anything. Every year, Vought comes up with a fake global crisis to justify the disappearance of all the soups for a week, who in reality are flown to a secluded tropical island to engage in all sorts of illegal and immoral activities. Drugs, alcohol, illicit sexual activities, and all kinds of perversion are shown in every page of the comic in extreme graphic detail. While the comic knew no bounds and illustrated events as blasphemous as Homelander having sex with Soldier Boy, the show made some distinct changes in Herogasm's portrayal. The Boys has never shied away from broadcasting uncomfortable carnal scenes, and while Termite's explosion out of her suitor's penis set the tone for the Herogasm episode to follow in Season 3, the orgy event was not something sanctioned by Vought in this case. It was shown to be a private party organized by former Payback members, the TNT twins. While Herogasm exists independently as a revelous event in the comics, it was reduced to a backdrop for a pivotal plot twist in the show, and obviously, scenes like Black Noir raping Huie didn't make the cut. Here, Soldier Boy, Butcher, and Huie walk into a sex spree to kill the TNT twins and end up facing truth bombs from the former's past. So, while the tone of Herogasm's extremity was somewhat maintained in the show, Amazon Studios' witty disclaimer at the beginning of the episode did overset fans' expectations. That said, Herogasm is still one of the best episodes of The Boys, and the makers have done a brilliant job at interweaving glaring sexual content and nudity with major narrative points, making Herogasm more than a CGI penis-filled fest. What's the story behind MMs Nickname? As we all know, Marvin T. Milk, who appears to be next in command to Butcher for the Boys, has a really unusual nickname. Why would such an imposing vigilante have a nickname as ridiculous as Mother's Milk? Though the show never really explored this and mostly chalks it up to his nurturing role in the group, the comics have a really shocking explanation for MM's pet name. It so happens that MM was born with Compound V in his blood. His mother worked at a Vought facility and, with constant exposure to the serum, birthed the soup, Marvin, who enjoys superhuman strength and durability with a genius-level intellect. However, unique to his case, MM has to keep consuming his mother's Compound V-loaded breast milk to retain his superpowers and slow down his aging. Though the show has given a vague explanation for the milk part of his name, his original backstory is yet to be dug up, and honestly, MM coming out as a soup would make for a remarkable plot twist. Are you aware that the boys were originally a CIA-backed group in the comics, giving them more resources than in the show? Well, in the TV series, the boys is an independent contingency group to counter the horrific actions of the Supes. The comics had a different inception story for the team. In the comics, the boys were a special operations team created by Colonel Mallory to monitor and police Vought's superheroes in an attempt to save the normal public from any outrageous actions taken by them. In this context, the boys also had a responsibility to prevent Vought from pushing their superheroes into national defense. As a CIA-backed team, the boys had access to all the resources, intelligence, and legal counsel from the national government. However, the team soon changed their objective due to Butcher's growing influence, and Mallory finally decommissioned the group following the 2001 face-off between the boys and the Seven, which caused civil casualties and negative publicity. However, in 2004, Mallory quietly reactivated the team after perceiving new threats from Vought's heroes. This time, the boys were back with a newfound vengeance and aggression to kill superheroes. This particular point has somewhat been touched upon in the show. While the boys primarily operate as a self-proclaimed group of vigilantes with a personal vendetta against the Supes and work without any official recognition or funding, Butcher and do reveal some past connections to the CIA and its former agent, Mallory. Though informal, these subtle connections established by Mallory's role in the show make it faithful to the source material. However, deprived of any government support, the boys have to work more secretively and cautiously in the show with occasional help from Mallory. Sometimes, even the deputy director of the CIA, Susan Raynor, who had a complicated romantic past with Butcher, pulled strings for him before being killed by Victoria Newman, but that's about all the references to the CIA that the show makes. I guess we can only wonder what would happen if Butcher and the rest of the boys flashed a CIA badge while hunting down the Supes. Have you ever noticed that the Seven's Tower is a parody of Marvel's Stark Tower and the Fantastic Four's Baxter Building? Don't tell me the massive skyscraping Vought Tower doesn't remind you of Avengers Tower or the Fantastic Four's Baxter Building for that matter. If you were wondering about these uncanny similarities, let us tell you that it wasn't that unusual after all. While the comic had a huge airship floating over New York's skyline as the headquarters of the Seven, the show revised it with a high-rise, probably in an attempt to cut down the expensive CGI work. Interestingly, the low-orbit satellite base in the comic was a reference to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s helicarrier and the Justice League's satellite watchtower from DC Comics. However, the enormous Vought Tower with the digit 7 carved into the side is indeed a direct rip on MCU's Avengers Tower, and executive producer Eric Kripke even said that the parallel actually helped strengthen the show's satirical tone and provided better ground for parodies of Marvel and DC superheroes. Though it was primarily a budgetary choice, Vought Tower does allow for greater mockery of famous superhero franchises while maintaining the audience's awe and disbelief. Moreover, keeping the Supes in the same building as the Vought authorities heightened the bureaucratic tension, one of the biggest USPs of the show. In reality, Vought Tower is based on Roy Thompson Hall in Toronto with some CGI touches to give it the tall appearance. Who was Stormfront in the comics? One of the show's strongest characters with seemingly unbeatable powers, who was, to be honest, pretty much sensualized for the screen, was Stormfront. Portrayed as a ruthless female superhero in a bodysuit akin to Catwoman's, Stormfront's complicated dynamic with Homelander accounted for quite a few WTF moments in the show. However, the character has a completely different arc in the comics. For starters, Stormfront is a man in the original story. He was the first Nazi superhuman who informally led the payback and was powerful enough to give Homelander a run for his money. He was the only surviving subject of the Third Reich's V program and was brought to the US by Vogelbaum in 1938, where Vought decided to raise him as a supe despite his Nazi philosophies. Interestingly, in the comics, it was Stormfront's Nazi DNA that was used to create Homelander. While the show swapped his gender and cast Aya Cash to play the character, Stormfront was portrayed as an evil and manipulative superhero similar to her villainous male version in the comics, who only has one goal: creating a Nazi super race. Depicting her as a female with a sexual relationship with Homelander instead of following the comics version of Stormfront as a straight man having a fling with Queen Maeve was strategic to establish Homelander's desperate need for attention and validation in the show. This relationship also ensured that Stormfront could not be sidelined in the Seven and posed a formidable threat to the boys. It was a clever parody of the rise of Nazism in the US, and the show was actually becoming too full of testosterone. Stormfront was a much-needed breath of fresh air, pun intended. Though the character dies both in the comics comics and the show, Stormfront's end was way more brutal in the former, dying at the hands of the boys. However, in the series, Ryan severely injures her with his laser vision, after which she kills herself, making things even more complex for Homelander and virtually turning him into an unapologetic, ruthless devil. In a way, it was essential to change Stormfront's gender in the show to maneuver the entire storyline around Homelander and his personality traits and keep him at the forefront as the main antagonist of the show. Did you know that in the comics, the Deep eventually joins a new superhero team called True and gets a bizarre makeover? In a major twist of events in the comics, the boys are successful in killing most of the members of the Seven in the series-ending conflict. Following a massive battle between the superheroes and an armada led by none other than Billy Butcher, Deep, the aquatic superhero, manages to survive the boys' killing spree and goes ahead to become part of something bigger, probably better too. Trying to get over the unforgivable mistakes of the Seven, American Consolidated formed a new team of supes known as the True. The Deep, one of the few members of the Seven who had a moral compass in the comics, as opposed to the Aquaman spoof played by Chase Crawford in the TV adaptation, was a part of this newly created team. Appearing in a brand new all-white costume with a conical hood resembling that of Ku Klux Klan members and a similar window hole like that of his diver suit, joining True was Deep's final attempt to survive as a superhero. Unfortunately, executive James Sitwell didn't even entertain the idea of this rebranded team. Have you realized that Soldier Boy and Tech Knight are parodies of Captain America and Iron Man, respectively? It doesn't take much to realize that Soldier Boy is a direct parody of Captain America given his iconic shield. While revealing Soldier Boy's backstory in Season 3, the boys clearly depicted him as an imitation of the famous Captain, however with key differences in motive. While both men were injected with superpowered serums during World War II to fight against the Nazis, their reasons for undergoing the experiment were completely different. Cap, as we know, took the super soldier serum to gain an otherwise unattainable strength to protect his country. Thus, while patriotism and righteousness were deeply rooted in Cap's intentions, Soldier Boy took Compound V as a means of getting his parents' approval, an effort ultimately dismissed as a gimmick by his father, who would have simply preferred his son work harder. Soldier Boy didn't even have an ounce of the morality or goodness that Steve Rogers has, yet he stood there with unimaginable power and as a national treasure. This was the boys' clear dig at the underlying hypocrisy of Steve Rogers' overnight transformation into a living slab of muscles, posing questions over the necessity of such shiny abs for nationalist services. Not just Captain America, the boys also low-key spoofs the one and only Iron Man with the creation of Tech Knight, an extremely rich superhero with a weird sex addiction who doesn't really have any superpowers, much like our boy Tony Stark. In the comics, Tech Knight wears a technologically powered super armor that enables him access to a range of superhuman skills. He can fly, wield flamethrowers, and emit electrical charge, but his superhero career wasn't that long, even after joining the Payback. His attempt to make Gladio his sidekick is yet another parody of Tony Stark and Spider-Man's relationship in the Marvel Universe. Also, Tech Knight is among the few supes in the comics who's not entirely driven by self-interest and sacrifices himself while saving innocent people. Tech Knight was introduced in the show, albeit in a sidelined manner. Though his tech-based suit never appeared on screen, it's unmissable how he's a mirror image of Iron Man, whose role unfortunately ended very soon in the series. Were you aware that Billy Butcher is even more ruthless and morally ambiguous in the comics than in the show? If the show's Billy Butcher made you think he's a badass, the comics version will give you chills. Hailing from London's East End, William J. Butcher, or as we know him, Billy, is a former CIA agent turned vigilante. As charming as he might be, Butcher is a dangerous man consumed by his hatred for Homelander and is sworn to avenge his wife. He's physically quite large with great strength, and he's extremely violent. Billy also has a pet bulldog named Terror in the comics whom he is extremely protective of. Though most of his characteristics and personal vendetta was adapted in the show, fans believe the makers toned down his mercilessness for the screen. While Carl Urban does an excellent job at bringing Butcher to life, his role has somewhat been restricted for the mainstream TV show, which couldn't delve into such drastic levels of cynicism as in the comics. The comic Butcher is way more competent than his TV counterpart, who doesn't think twice before acting all sadistic and crazy. While he gets quite a few sympathetic scenes with Becca and Ryan in the show, the comic version doesn't directly portray him under any such tragic light, but glorifies him as a storm to be weathered. Butcher is written as an extremely cold-blooded and morally ambiguous man who doesn't think before committing unspeakable acts like killing Becky's newborn or manipulating Huie into becoming his spy. In our opinion, Karl Urban has managed to add some much-needed depth and nuance to a character who otherwise was heralded as the symbol of a stone-hearted soup killer. Did you know that in the boys' universe, superheroes caused the destruction of the Brooklyn Bridge during 9/11, not the Twin Towers? No matter the amount of superheroes in the boys' universe, they do everything but make the world a better place. One such instance in the comics was the depiction of the catastrophic 9/11. Though the scenes are horrifying, it provides the perfect thematic backdrop for the story. In issue 36 of the comics, readers first get a look at the event in the boys' world when MM and Huie look over the devastated Brooklyn Bridge in the aftermath of 9/11. However, it wasn't just the terrorist attack that destroyed this historical structure, but rather the incompetence of the Seven in tackling the crisis. In an extremely dark yet comical manner, Homelander and the rest of the Seven not only failed to prevent the planned anarchy, but ended up contributing to it. Their inefficient actions actually caused a plane to crash into the Brooklyn Bridge, killing hundreds of civilians. As shocking as the moment was, it aptly portrayed the worthlessness of these so-called superheroes in the face of a real crisis. Have you noticed that every t-shirt Huie wears in the show features a slogan or band name, just like in the comics? Underneath all the gruesome killings and bloody fights, there's a hidden gem in the boys' universe for fashion lovers. Yes, we know that sounds pretty ridiculous, but hear us out. Have you ever noticed Huie's t-shirts in both the comics and the show? If you have an eye for detail, you know where I'm heading with this. Huie has a knack for wearing vintage concert t-shirts, some of which are even on sale on various sites. He has most notably sported a Van Halen, Billy Joel, and Nirvana tee, among others. Huie's band t-shirts have inspired several fan collections and blog posts listing every tee he wears throughout the series. His love for rock bands and pop culture adds a nostalgic and visually intriguing layer to his character. Did you know that Barack Obama is a fan of the boys? While the Supes are targeting the White House in the show, in reality, former American President Barack Obama is a fan of the series. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Obama revealed his pandemic watch list, and guess what? Boys was one of his favorite shows. Obama praised how the superhero show throws light on grim issues like racism, corporate power, and mass media in a capitalist world. Creators of the show were naturally ecstatic to have Obama as a fan, and Eric Kripke even tweeted a heartfelt thank you for getting a shout-out from him. Anthony Starr, who plays Homelander, also took to Twitter to express his amazement. Kimiko only spoke once in the comics. Unlike in the show, where Kimiko exists as an integral part of the boys and is the one with Compound V in her bloodstream, the comic doesn't even give her a name and simply refers to her as the female, probably as a part of her lingering mystery. It was Kripke who changed her origin and gave her an identity to make the character more relatable and arouse empathy. Not just that, Kripke also gave Kimiko an in-depth backstory, quite a painful one actually, which explained her muteness compared to in the comics, where her silence remains mostly unexplored and ambiguous. However, all the interpretations of Kimiko being quiet, the one that makes sense is that she can speak but just chooses not to. In fact, near the end of the comic series, she actually says one line, "I hate mean people," marking the only incidence of her ever speaking. Did you know the show was almost canceled? How bummed would you have been if your pandemic watch list didn't have The Boys? Well, as unlikely as it sounds today, it wasn't that distant of a possibility. Garth Ennis' comics were initially set to be adapted into a film at Columbia Pictures. Robertson revealed in an interview theaters were aspiring to turn the comics into a movie trilogy even before the MCU popularized the idea of box office success from comic book adaptations. It even went through several developmental stages for 8 years, 2008 forward, plans of taking Adam McKay as the director, production budget $100 million. However, the project was dropped by Columbia over creative differences between the studio and McKay. Despite having a complete script for the first installment, the studio backed out as screening The Boys seemed too bold a step decades ago. Soon after, Paramount Pictures acquired the rights in 2012 and restarted the production process, which was ultimately shifted to Cinemax for a TV adaptation. Finally, in November 2017, Amazon Studios stepped in and went ahead with a television adaptation of the comics after Cinemax decided to cancel it before the production began. And there you have it, the most unhinged superhero show firmed for a run of 5 seasons. Did you know that the show has multiple spin-offs? Apart from the comic miniseries and its limited editions, the TV show also has a couple of spin-offs, like The Boys Presents Diabolical, an animated 8-episode anthology series that premiered on Amazon Prime Video in March 2022. The show was appreciated for expanding the Boys universe. One released next year got an even warmer welcome from the audience. We're talking, of course, about Gen V, which intricately shows the making of superheroes by Vought International, dark secrets underlying it. As a part of the larger Boys universe, the narratives of the two shows are expected to be closely related, a theory confirmed by Kate and Sam's appearance at the end of The Boys' last season finale. Moreover, two other shows, The Boys Mexico and Vought Rising, have been officially announced by Amazon Studios, are currently in production. Interestingly, the latter is supposed to be a prequel to the main series set in the 1950s, with Soldier Boy and Stormfront making comebacks. Okay, here's some trivia. The Boys also have a promotional web series on YouTube titled 7 on 7 on VNN Cameron Coleman. It's basically a news show within the show's world, filling the narrative gap between The Boys and Gen V. The series also has an audio podcast, The Boys Deeper and Deeper, centering on Deep and his personal shenanigans. Did you know The Boys have an in-universe pornographic show? Hilarious as it might sound, soup porn is a thing that actually exists within the show's world. Remember the episode where Huie had to babysit Lamplighter while the rest of the boys are on a mission with Newman and Mallory? Yeah, the one where Lamplighter somehow ends up bonding with, excitedly shares his soup porn collection with him. You want a closer look at these adult film titles? Use Amazon's X-ray feature for the full backstory. The entire NSFW plot has intrigued audiences, and an indie production company has even offered to release the parody episodes on their site as a tie-in with Amazon. However, understandably, the studio has refrained from broadcasting any such content, as superhero adult scenes still remain a forbidden genre. Did you know The Boys had a hidden connection with The Incredibles? We know how bizarre it sounds to even take those two names in the same breath. The Boys managed to have a sly connection to the famous Pixar superhero movie, The Incredibles. If you recall, the Seven had their very own costume designer, Isadora, who appears in the first season as a guest cast to design Starlight's costume. Funnily, the character was inspired by none other than Edna Mode, the fashion stylist responsible for creating those iconic tech-savvy red and black suits for the Parr family. Pro tip, take a close look at Isadora's glasses and you might just see the resemblance to Edna's black eyewear. Black Noir did not have a nut allergy in the comics. As a powerful clone of Homelander, the comic version of Black Noir was far from being overthrown by something as trivial as a nut allergy. However, in the show, Noir's allergic reaction to tree nuts plays a pivotal role in his confrontation with Maeve. When Homelander recruits Noir to eliminate Maeve in Season 2, she narrowly escapes by shoving a bar of almond joy into his mouth and kicking away his EpiPen. Curiously, the idea of incorporating the nut allergy as a plot point was inspired by the real-life condition of Nathan Mitchell, who plays Noir in the show. Darick Kripke revealed that they learned about Mitchell's severe nut allergy while promoting the first season of the show at Comic-Con, playfully decided to give that weakness to Black Noir. The fact that a soup as potent as Noir could succumb to something so simple and common fascinated the makers of the show. Did you know that Seth Rogan almost directed the pilot of the show? The Boys was ready to go on the floor holding the hands of none other than Seth Rogan. Known for his comedic skills, Rogan was originally appointed to direct the pilot episode with Evan Goldberg. However, things soon went sideways when the duo backed out due to scheduling conflicts. Dan Trachtenberg was then onboarded to take up directing duties with Rogan and Goldberg serving as executive producers. Trachtenberg has undeniably done an impeccable job with filming, but I believe a part of us always wonder how things would have turned out had the ball been in Rogan's court. Did you know the show has connections to Supernatural? Remember the TV series about monster hunting that premiered over 2 decades ago? Yes, we're talking about none other than Supernatural, which was a delight for horror lovers. Intriguingly, Supernatural's creator, Darick Kripke, is the mastermind behind The Boys, who clearly still has his heart in the horror show. As a result, The Boys has many supernatural Easter eggs scattered here and there, and no, it wasn't just about casting Jensen Ackles as both Dean and Soldier Boy in the 2 shows, it's much more than that. The Boys make several nods to Supernatural, and one such blatant instance was the car trunk scene. After finally finding Soldier Boy in Season 3, Butcher and Huie went to collect their weapons from a car trunk. This was a clear homage to the famous inside trunk shots appearing multiple times on Supernatural, most notably during Season 2. Kripke also gave a tribute on the date of January 24th, which is both Dean Winchester's birthday in Supernatural and the day Soldier Boy was experimented upon. When fans saw Jensen in The Boys, they couldn't help but wonder whether his signature Impala would also make a cameo in the show. To their pleasure, black Chevy Impala from 1967 was seen hitting Stormfront in a viral in-show social media clip. Coincidence much? Apart from Ackles, Kripke also cast several other stars from Supernatural in The Boys, including Gatlin Griffith, Jim Beaver, and Nathan Mitchell. In conclusion, The Boys did not just allow Kripke to bring back his favorite actors or pay tribute to famous supernatural sequences, it gave a space for him to let his creative vision flow free. No way the television censor board would have allowed Kripke to murder a group of nuns in a horror series, but with The Boys, no streaming rules whatsoever, and Soldier Boy could guiltlessly slaughter a nun and priest. Marvelous verdict! Okay guys, there you have it. 25 mind-blowing facts hiding in The Boys universe. Being chucked out of the DC offices to secret CIA connections, even some Pixar references, these unseen gems prove that Ennis and Kripke built a franchise much bigger than spandex suits. If you think you know every dirty trick in Vought's playbook, you're mistaken. The comics are much darker and deranged, and the show is really only the tip of the iceberg. With Season 5 of The Boys scheduled for 2026, only imagine what curveballs this superhero show is going to throw at us. Let us know your favorite fact in the comments down below. Get yourself to a nice little boys marathon. That's all we got for you this time, but thanks for watching. Stay safe out there and have a marvelous day.